The first thing that hit Marcus wasn't the stench or the heat, it was the silence. The air inside Guangzhou Penitentiary was heavy, dense with something he couldn't name. Maybe fear, maybe history. The guards didn't speak to him. Not in English, not in Mandarin. Just grunts, hand gestures, and the occasional shove. Marcus Cole, 35, born and raised in south-central Los Angeles, had left his old life behind. He wasn't the same man who once ran the streets with the Crips in his teens. That version of him was buried long ago, under years of discipline, rehabilitation, and construction work. He had come to China as part of a trade project, managing equipment and logistics for a Californian contractor. But that meant nothing now. The accusation was clear. He was found near a construction site after an assault, confused, bloodied, and with a Chinese man unconscious at his feet. Marcus swore it was self-defense, but no one listened. Now, in a grey prison uniform 2 sizes too small, Marcus shuffled into Block C. The foreigner's block, as the guard barked in broken English. Except it didn't feel foreign. It felt watched. The hallways reeked of wet concrete and cabbage. Inmates peered through the bars of their cells with cold, narrowed eyes. They weren't friendly. As Marcus was escorted to his cell, whispers in. Mandarin followed him, punctuated by bursts of cruel laughter. The rusty door creaked open, and he was shoved inside. The cell was cramped, with 4 bunks stacked tightly. 2 men already occupied the space. They didn't speak, they just stared. One older, his face scarred and weathered by time, the other lean with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Neither acknowledged Marcus. He dropped his small cloth bag on the lower bunk and sat down, eyes forward. He'd been locked up before, but this wasn't the same. This wasn't home. The rules were different here. The days blurred together. Meals were mechanical. White rice, boiled greens, a small lump of grey meat on a metal tray. Marcus ate alone, careful not to draw attention. The stares and whispers followed him everywhere. He noticed the way some guards avoided looking at him, while others watched with thinly veiled suspicion. The nights were the worst. The thin mattress barely muffled the groans and distant shouts echoing through the concrete halls. At 3 a.m., a sudden banging on the bars jolted him awake. Someone shouted something Marcus couldn't understand. The whole block stirred like a disturbed beehive. He closed his eyes, waited for the chaos to pass. Marcus's mind drifted back home sometimes, to his daughter's smile, to the streets he'd left behind, but mostly he stayed silent, focused on survival, because in this place silence was a shield. The days dragged on in Guangzhou Penitentiary, each one blending into the next like a slow-moving river of grey concrete and muted voices. Marcus felt the weight of silence pressing down on him, not just the absence of sound, but the heaviness of eyes watching, judgments made without words. His cellmates remained distant. The older man, scarred and stoic, barely spoke. The cigarette. Smoker was quieter still, often staring out the barred window or into the dim hallway beyond. Marcus tried to learn the rhythms of the place, the strict routines, the shift changes, the unwritten rules no one said aloud, but everyone followed. Language was a wall. The guards barked commands in Mandarin. The other inmates muttered insults or warnings that floated just beyond his understanding. Occasionally, broken English slipped through, simple words like foreigner or American, but they carried no kindness. At mealtimes, Marcus kept his head down. The food was bland, served in tin trays that rattled against metal tables. Sometimes the rice was cold, sometimes too mushy. The vegetables tasted like waterlogged leaves. And the meat, when it appeared, was grey and unidentifiable. The other prisoners rarely shared their space. Most avoided eye contact. Some watched him with cold curiosity. Occasionally, a group of Chinese inmates would pass by and laugh. Quietly. Marcus knew the laughter wasn't friendly. One afternoon, Marcus noticed a group of 3 men speaking loudly nearby. Their voices carried a sharp edge, full of disdain. He caught a few English words, American, foreign dog, and understood the message clearly. He clenched his fists, but forced himself to remain still. Any reaction would mark him as a target. That night, Marcus lay on his bunk staring. At the cracked ceiling, the dull hum of the prison settled around him, broken only by the distant shouts and clanging doors. He thought about his life back in Los Angeles, how far he had come, and how far he still was from freedom. Despite the isolation, a quiet resolve grew inside him. He was not here to lose himself. He was here to survive, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way out. The noon bell echoed through Block C's narrow corridors, signaling the first wave of inmates to the cafeteria. The air was thick with humidity and the sharp metallic scent of rusted steel. Marcus stepped inside, clutching his tin tray with the day's meager meal, white rice, wilted bok choy, and a lump of greyish meat that barely passed for protein. He scanned the room, looking for a quiet corner. Finding none, he settled at a small table near the wall. The chatter around him was low, but filled with an undercurrent of hostility. Several pairs of eyes glanced his way, their looks sharp, assessing. Marcus kept his gaze fixed on his food, trying to appear invisible. But invisibility was a luxury he did not have. From the far end of the cafeteria, a trio of men pushed through the crowd. They wore the hardened expressions of men who had seen too many years inside these walls, their bodies marked with tattoos and scars that told stories Marcus couldn't read yet. They stopped in front of Marcus's table. The tallest one, broad-shouldered, with a cruel smile, leaned in and spat directly onto Marcus's rice. "Not enough for a dog like you," he sneered, eyes glinting maliciously. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, then slowly looked up. The man's smirk widened. Another in the group, thin-faced with a snake-like gaze, mimicked a crude American accent. "Hey, you want some fries with that?" "Ha ha, American fat!" The third, younger and quieter, leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes. "This place no America, Laowai. You small, weak, nobody here cares." Marcus clenched his fists beneath the table, his lips pressed into a firm line. He could feel the heat rising, the anger simmering, but he stayed silent. A nearby inmate chuckled darkly. "Fight back, Laowai. Show them you're not a mouse." Marcus shook his head minutely, still calm. He knew that fighting now would only make things worse. Suddenly, the tallest man reached out, grabbing Marcus's tray and flinging it to the floor. Rice and meat scattered across the cracked concrete, steam rising from the spilled tea. The cafeteria fell silent for a split second, then murmurs bubbled up. The thin man laughed. "Where's your pride, American? Or are you just a scared little dog?" Marcus rose slowly, deliberately, standing tall despite the stares. The three men circled him, their faces inches from his. "You think you tough? You think you belong here?" Marcus said nothing. Instead, he reached behind his neck and pulled at the collar of his prison shirt. As the fabric slipped over his shoulders and down his arms, a blue tapestry revealed itself across his chest and ribs, a sprawling tattoo of a six-pointed star with jagged edges, emblazoned with the bold letters, CRIPS. The effect was electric. A sudden hush fell over the cafeteria. Conversation stopped. Eyes widened. Some inmates leaned forward, eager to see this rare spectacle. The tallest man's jaw tightened. The snake-eyed one blinked rapidly, shifting his gaze downward as if the tattoo burned his eyes. The youngest man stepped back, nervously clearing his throat. Marcus held their eyes steadily, not with menace, but with quiet confidence, born from years of hardship. The room seemed to pulse with tension, the kind that says this moment was a turning point. One of the other inmates, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, whispered to a friend, That's the Crips here. The snake-eyed man finally spoke, voice low and grudging. You part of that gang? Marcus nodded slowly. Used to be. The tallest man spat again, but this time with a note of reluctant respect. We don't like Americans, but we respect strength. The silence stretched, thick and uncertain. Then the guards stormed in, yelling orders in rapid Mandarin, banging metal trays against tables to restore order. The crowd broke apart. Inmates shuffled back to their seats or cells, whispers trailing behind them. Marcus pulled his shirt back on, chest still burning with adrenaline and silent pride. He was no longer just the foreigner, the outsider. In Block C, he was something else entirely, and from that day forward, the way they looked at him had changed forever. The morning sun filtered weakly through the narrow, barred windows of Block C, casting long, cold shadows on the concrete floor. Marcus woke with a start, the echo of the previous day's confrontation still fresh in his mind. The tattoo on his chest wasn't just ink, it was a message, a warning, a declaration. He sat up on his lower bunk and glanced sideways at the two men who shared his cell. The older man, with the weathered scars of a lifetime behind bars, watched him quietly. The younger one, whose cigarette had long since burned to ash, nodded with a hint of respect. Breakfast came quietly, a thin porridge and steamed buns, but the atmosphere had shifted. The usual hostility was tempered now by a wary curiosity. Marcus was no longer invisible. Outside the cell, voices carried down the hall. Did you see that? The Crips tattoo in China? Whispered a voice. Another replied, That's dangerous. He's not just some foreigner. He's got connections. Marcus caught snatches of conversation as the day wore on. The guards were stricter now, their eyes sharper. The other inmates, especially those who had been loudest before, gave him wider berth. Mid-morning, the youngest inmate from his cell approached, his voice low but steady. Marcus, right? I'm Jian. You survived that because they saw your tattoo. But it also made you a target. Marcus looked at Jian, weighing his words. They won't forget. I need allies here. Jian hesitated, then nodded. There are a few here who don't like the gangs or are too smart to pick fights without backing. I can introduce you. That afternoon, Marcus was led to a small, dim room where a handful of inmates gathered. Their faces were a patchwork of suspicion and hardened experience. One stepped forward, a broad man named Wei with a quiet authority. You're the American with the Crips tattoo? Marcus nodded. I am. But I'm not here to fight anyone without reason. Wei studied him, then gave a slow nod. Respect. We don't have the Crips here, but we have our own codes. You understand loyalty. Marcus met his gaze, steady and calm. More than most. The conversation was cut short by the sudden arrival of the loudest and toughest gang in the block, a group known as the Black Dragons. Their leader, a tall man named Liang, swaggered in, a cruel smile on his lips. Look what we have here, Liang sneered. The foreigner thinks he's tough with his stupid tattoo. Wei stepped forward. This is not a fight for you, Liang. You want trouble, you'll find it, but not today. Liang laughed, eyes flashing. We'll see about that. The tension crackled in the stale air. Marcus remained silent, feeling the weight of every stare, every breath. But inside, he was already calculating his next move. Because in this prison, respect was a currency, and trust was harder to earn than freedom. The cold concrete corridor hummed with quiet menace as Marcus was escorted back to his cell. The earlier meeting still replayed in his mind. Liang's smirk, Wei's calm defiance, Jian's nervous glances. The prison was a chessboard, and every move mattered. Back inside the cell, Jian lit a cigarette with shaking hands. You got their attention now? Black dragons don't forget insults. Marcus exhaled slowly. Good. I want to be noticed, but not for the wrong reasons. The older inmate, who had remained silent until now, spoke for the first time. His voice was gravelly, worn. "You wear their fear like armor, Marcus, but fear can turn to hate. You need more than tattoos." Marcus met his eyes. "What do I need?" "Respect. And respect comes from actions, not symbols." That night, as the prison settled into uneasy silence, footsteps echoed down the hall. A sudden commotion outside their cell made them all tense. A guard barked orders in Mandarin, harsh and clipped. Voices rose in anger, then a sharp scream cut through the air. Jian pressed his back to the wall, whispering, "Something's going down in the next block. Could be black dragons." Marcus stood, muscles coiled. "If they're testing me, they'll find I'm no easy target." The hours dragged, thick with anticipation. At dawn, Marcus was summoned to the yard, a dusty, confined space where power was often displayed through violence. Liang was already there, flanked by his gang, eyes cold and calculating. "So, American," Liang sneered. "You think your gang's name means anything here? This is our world." Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm not here for war, but I won't be your victim." Wei appeared quietly beside Marcus. "Words won't solve this, Liang, but fighting without purpose is foolish." Liang's eyes darted between them. "You have one day to prove where your loyalties lie. Show us you belong here, or leave. Otherwise we settle this." A tense silence followed, broken only by the clang of a distant gate. Marcus looked around, the yard, the walls, the hardened faces, and knew one thing. Survival here meant understanding the language of power, respect, and fear. The courtyard was stifling under the sharp morning sun. Marcus stood shoulder to shoulder with Wei, facing the hard eyes of Liang and his black dragons. Liang stepped forward, voice low but heavy with menace. "You have 24 hours. Prove you're not a joke. Show us you can earn respect, or face the consequences." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Respect isn't given, it's earned. I'm ready." Wei gave Marcus a slight nod. "We'll watch." The crowd of inmates around them murmured, a mix of curiosity and tension. Some whispered warnings, others bets on how it would end. Later that day, in the narrow hallways lined with peeling paint and flickering lights, Marcus found Jian waiting. "Plans are being made," Jian said quietly. "Liang's not just testing you, he's planning something bigger." Marcus frowned. "What kind of something bigger?" "Control territory. The Black Dragons want more power inside these walls. If you don't take sides, you're an obstacle." Marcus rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Then I need allies." Jian glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice. "There's a group that stayed quiet so far. Not just muscles, but brains. They might back you, if you prove you're worth it." That night, Marcus sat alone in his cell, the faint sounds of the prison's unrest drifting through the bars. His mind raced. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, yet isolation was. A death sentence here. Suddenly a shadow appeared by the door. Wei stepped inside, eyes sharp but cautious. "You're thinking too much," Wei said. "Sometimes survival means playing the game, but don't lose who you are." Marcus nodded slowly. "I won't. But I'm ready to fight smarter, not just harder." Outside, the prison breathed. A living, dangerous beast. Marcus was in its belly now, and every choice could tip the scales. The murmur of voices echoed through the dim-lit corridors as Marcus followed Wei deeper into the prison's hidden corners. Jin trailed behind, eyes alert to every shadow. "We don't have much time," Wei whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Liang's grip is tightening. If we don't act soon, you'll be trapped." Marcus nodded, the weight of every step pressing on him. "Who else is with us?" Jian pushed open a rusted metal door leading to a cramped room where a small group waited. Faces hardened by years behind bars, eyes sharp with cautious hope. "This is the Silver Tigers," Jian introduced. "Not as big as the Black Dragons, but they've got influence and brains. We want to show them you're serious." Marcus looked at each man and woman, some with tattoos, others scarred by battles both physical and mental. One of the Silver Tigers, a wiry man named Chen, stepped forward. "You carry your gang's mark on your skin, American, but here that means nothing if you can't back it up." Marcus met Chen's gaze steadily. "I'm not here to play old games. I want peace and respect." A tense silence followed. Wei broke it. "This isn't just about gangs or tattoos. It's survival. We need balance, or the whole place falls apart." The room seemed to breathe, the tension palpable. Jian added, "Liang has plans that could ignite a war. If we don't unite, no one walks out safe." Marcus swallowed hard. "Then let's make sure they don't get that chance." Outside, the prison walls held stories of pain, power, and broken dreams. Marcus realized that to survive, he had to become part of that story, or be swallowed by it. The tension inside Guangzhou Penitentiary was suffocating, heavier than the thick, humid summer air that pressed down relentlessly. Every corner, every shadow seemed charged with an electric anticipation. Word had spread fast. Marcus Cole, the American with the Crips tattoo, and his small coalition known as the Silver Tigers, had shaken the dominance of the Black Dragons, the largest and most ruthless gang inside the prison walls. The delicate balance of power had been disrupted, and now all eyes were on Marcus. As the grey light of dawn crept through the barred windows of the prison yard, Marcus stood tall and steady in the middle of the courtyard. He was flanked by Wei, a burly man with a scar running from his temple to his jawline. Jian, quick and calculating, with eyes that missed nothing, and a few other inmates who had chosen to side with Marcus, either out of respect, fear, or hope for change. The Crips tattoo stretched across Marcus's chest and shoulder, its bold blue ink a sharp contrast against his pale skin. It wasn't just a tattoo anymore. It was a symbol, a mark of survival, of hard-fought respect, of a life shaped by loyalty and hardship. Across the yard, the Black Dragons emerged, led by Liang, a tall, muscular man with cold eyes that seemed to cut through steel. They gathered like wolves preparing to hunt. Their faces were grim, hard, and their posture radiated menace. Every step they took echoed off the concrete, punctuating the silence that had settled over the prison yard. Liang's voice broke the quiet, low but carrying easily across the distance. "Time's up," he said, his accent thick and deliberate. "Show us if you're worthy, American." Marcus's jaw clenched. The man standing before him was no stranger to violence or challenge, but Marcus was done with games and power struggles. "I'm done running games," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's finish this." The two groups began to circle, eyes locked, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. It was a primal dance, a test of dominance, will, and survival. The air felt electric, the collective breath of dozens of inmates held tight in anticipation. Suddenly, a sharp shout rang out, a signal. Chaos exploded in an instant. Fists flew like lightning. Bodies crashed against cold, unforgiving concrete. Shouts and grunts echoed from every corner. Marcus moved with the practiced skill of a man who had fought countless battles, blocking punches, delivering sharp counters, his movements precise and deliberate. Wei was a storm beside him, fierce and relentless. Jian and Chen, another ally, worked frantically to keep others from turning the brawl into an all-out massacre. The battle was brutal and raw, every strike carrying the weight of years filled with rage, fear, and the primal instinct to survive. At one critical moment, Liang lunged at Marcus, teeth bared in a snarl. Marcus dodged swiftly, grabbing Liang's arm and twisting with enough force to send the gang leader crashing to the ground. Breathing heavily, Marcus looked down at Liang, who spat a mouthful of dirt with venom. "You think you've won?" Liang growled. "This is just the beginning." Before Marcus could respond, the shrill wail of sirens shattered the air. Guards poured into the yard, shouting commands, wielding batons and radios. The inmates scattered quickly, retreating to avoid severe punishment. Marcus stood alone in the aftermath, chest heaving, sweat mingling with dirt on his face. He scanned the crowd. Some inmates looked at him with grudging respect, others with simmering grudges, a dangerous mix. Wei approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You did it," Wei said, voice low but sincere. "You made them listen." Marcus shook his head slowly, exhaustion and determination mixing in his eyes. "It's not about winning fights," Marcus said quietly. "It's about changing how we survive here." Days later, the warden summoned Marcus. His transfer to another block was imminent, one with fewer gang conflicts but much stricter rules. The move was a warning and a reward all at once. Marcus's influence inside the prison was undeniable now, but so was the danger that came with it. In the solitude of his new cell, Marcus traced the outline of his Crips tattoo with a trembling finger. The tattoo, once a mark of a troubled past in the streets of Los Angeles, had become a beacon, a sign that even in the darkest places, strength, honor, and resilience could carve a path forward. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was a man who had earned respect beyond borders, in a world where survival was an art and power was the currency of life. Marcus Cole's story is not just about a fight inside the cold, grey walls of a Chinese prison. It's a story about identity, resilience, and how the marks we carry, whether physical, like the Crips tattoo, or emotional, like the scars from our past, shape how the world sees us and how we see ourselves. When Marcus first entered that prison, he was simply the American, an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But he quickly realized that even far from home, the dynamics of power, respect, and survival are universal. Fear, distrust, the need for safety and status, these things exist wherever people find themselves isolated, vulnerable, or in conflict. His tattoo, which back in Los Angeles might have meant belonging to a gang marked by violence and fear, took on a different meaning in the Chinese prison. It became a symbol of strength, a reminder that Marcus was not just any man, but someone with a story, someone who couldn't be ignored or underestimated. This raises some profound questions. What does it truly mean to belong? In a world so diverse and globalized, our identities are fluid, changeable, and often conflicting. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere because of your skin color, your language, or your background? How did that shape who you are? How do we define strength and respect in unfamiliar or hostile environments? Marcus's strength wasn't just physical. It was born from his past, his survival, and his ability to adapt. When you face difficult situations, what do you rely on to hold your ground? What symbols or memories give you courage? How do cultural misunderstandings fuel conflict, and how can empathy break those barriers? The tension in the prison came not only from violence, but from fear and prejudice on both sides. How do we confront our own biases when faced with someone different? How can we build bridges in places where walls seem strongest? Can past mistakes define your future, or can you rewrite your story? Marcus had a troubled past, but it didn't imprison him forever. Instead, it gave him lessons, scars, and strength. Do you believe it's possible to overcome your past and reshape your identity? What steps can someone take to transform hardship into growth? Finally, what role does community play in survival? Even in the harshest environments, Marcus found allies and created a small coalition. How important is connection and trust when you feel isolated? Who has been your unexpected ally during challenging times? Marcus's journey reminds us that beneath the surface, every person carries a complex story. And sometimes, what makes us different is exactly what commands respect. His experience challenges us to look beyond appearances and stereotypes, to recognize shared humanity even in the most unlikely places. So, as you reflect on Marcus's story, Ask yourself, what marks do I carry, visible or invisible? That shape how I move through the world. How do I respond when I'm misunderstood or underestimated? And most importantly, how can I use my own story, not to divide, but to connect and empower others? Thank you for joining this journey. The story of Marcus. Cole may be over for now, but the questions it raises are just beginning. What will your answer be?